Hey everyone, this is the first video of two for motivation, which is the second content topic of the third week of remote learning. So the two videos for motivation, this first one's going to focus on some motivation theories and some theories about what motivates us and which motivation might have a larger effect on our behavior and our thinking. Um, we'll look at about two or three of those. And then the second video will be on types of motivators or types of motivation, biological, social, etc. So motivation, obviously, one of those things that's kind of different for everybody. Some people are really highly motivated for everyday life and certain areas of their life. Some people might need a little more push to be motivated. So it's kind of, it's one of those things where, this is kind of a different experience for everyone. And some things motivate you more than others, whether it's internal, external, whatever, intrinsic, extrinsic. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Um, but again, this first video is focused entirely on some theories. Before we get into that, the definition of motivation is just a general term for the biological, emotional, and cognitive and social processes that are involved in starting, directing, and maintaining behavior. In other words, it's the things that start our motivation, direct our motivation, maintain our behavior in regards to motivation, and those things can be biological, emotional, cognitive, social, anything really. We have a very wide range of motivators. Some of it is innate within us, kind of our basic needs and basic survival needs. But then there's also some things that are kind of outside of that and are more extrinsic in nature, things that are of more of societal or social or external needs and wants that can also be motivators as well. So because motivations and motives for our behavior are so wide ranging, there are also a very wide range of theories about what type of motivation or what type of motivators are the most important for our behavior and for our wants and needs. So, like I said, this first PowerPoint is pretty short. Get into a couple of theories, but before we get into that, intrinsic versus extrinsic, you've probably heard of this, the difference between this before. The easy way to remember it is the first two letters. Intrinsic is internal motivators, personal motivators, and then extrinsic are the things outside of oneself, the external motivators. This is usually the slide where I try to be a little, sarcastic with people in class and ask, okay, how many of you signed up for AP Psych because you just really truly wanted to know about psychology and you find it personally enjoyable, and there's usually a few people that raise their hand, but then then I'll ask the next question of, well, how many of you signed up for it because it's an AP class and you heard it was easier than most and you could get good grades in it, and most people raise their hands, which there's nothing wrong with that, but and there's nothing wrong with having internal or intrinsic and extrinsic motivators. There's nothing wrong with that at all. Um, you know, you need a combination usually of both. But what the and we're going to talk a little bit about this with theories. What we've started to find through research in psychology is that things that if things that start out as intrinsic get replaced by extrinsic motivators, then the extrinsic takes over. I use, and this is just one example. I'm not saying it's the best, but sports and professional sports, especially, and even college sports, you could say that I would say the vast majority of athletes started playing sports because they found it just personally enjoyable and they had a lot of fun and it was really cool and fun for them, and it was intrinsically motivating for them to start that activity. But then if they perform at a high level or they perform good enough to possibly, to get, a scholarship of some sort, or even if, even higher than that in professional ranks, then extrinsic motivators would then take over and replace. And in other words, the extrinsic motivators then became the primary motivation: the money, the praise, the recognition, those kind of things. Um, they kind of take over the just personal achievement, enjoyment, the pride in oneself, those kind of things. Not saying that every professional athlete or anything like that has never been intrinsically motivated. I don't think that's the case, but extrinsic motivators can become the primary motivators over time if it lets them, I guess you could say. Okay, so a couple of theories. So instinct theory is mostly just the theory that um, says our actions and uh, our motivation is inspired entirely by survival, or by the basically it's things that we are born with. We're instinctual, and that they're not learned at all. And they occur kind of throughout the species. This is kind of Darwinistic in nature, in that basically the motivators that we had were very basic, you know, and instinctual. Obviously, the survival element, but also things like cleanliness, modesty, love, rivalry, those kind of things all made their way into our behavior according to this theory. The problem is it was very basic, it's very subjective, and it really kind of fell out of favor pretty quickly because they didn't really have any ability to back up what the theory said. There was no data. There was no, there was nothing that you could fully use to explain human emotion in regards to being motivated by that. So anyway, so that's the first theory. Really, you're not going to hear much about it. Now, this theory is the one that tends to show up the most in most years in regards to the AP exam or anything like that. It's drive reduction theory. This came about 1930s, 1940s. It's based on the idea, this biological concept. If you think back to your science classes, the biological concept of maintaining homeostasis or maintaining equilibrium, um, a stable internal state. So what this theory says is that when we are not in homeostasis, we have a lack of homeostasis, we need something within us. In other words, if our needs are not met, that creates a drive, and then the drive motivates us to act to get back to homeostasis. Okay, and then once we return to homeostasis, usually something else happens, and that motivates our behavior. So the example would be like, if you look over here at this here, I'll try to draw on the right here. So this image here. So basically, we start here at homeostasis, and then something happens, to create a lack of homeostasis, which would be maybe we're hungry, maybe we're thirsty, maybe we have to go to the bathroom or whatever. Then that creates a need for water, food, drink, going to the bathroom, whatever. And then that drive that's created by that need is what motivates us to act, go get something to eat, go get something to drink, go to use the bathroom, whatever. Um, and then we return to homeostasis, and then eventually something else happens. Now, so this theory makes a lot of sense if you're looking at it from a biological perspective and you look at it strictly from kind of biological needs, but this doesn't do a great job of explaining motivation in regards to, maybe I guess you could say kind of more subjective and kind of abstract terms, like, or abstract things like emotion, or social motivators or things like that. It doesn't do a great job of explaining that, but in terms of biology, in terms of biological motivators, this is the most basic and really the easiest way to explain why we act the way we do if there is a biological reason behind it. Okay, so moving on. So this theory, the arousal theory, this is arousal in the the sensory sense, or the cognitive sense. So basically, what this theory says is that as human beings, we are innately curious, and because of that, we tend to seek out things that are complex and that arouse the senses. Um, so, uh, the example I use with this is, I love riding roller coasters. That's one of my things that um, I will seek that out. I find it fun. But that's about the extent of my thrill seeking. Okay, you're not going to get me to skydive. You're never going to get me bungee jump or anything like that. Like, in other words, you know my motivation for the arousal in that sense would be kind of stop at like it would kind of stop at that that's kind of the edge I would go to if you want to think of it like that. So if you look down here at this image at the bottom, the Yerkes-Dodson law basically just says that it's actually we are motivated up to a certain point. Okay. Which right here, we want to get into this optimal level here of arousal or stress. It actually helps our performance. Okay. It actually helps our motivation. But then if it's too much, if we get down into this, this too much area here, um, it creates anxiety, it creates disorganization, um, and we are no longer motivated because of that. In this first part here, basically, if we have a low level of stress or a low level of um, arousal, then we're not motivated to do it in the first place. This kind of helps explain procrastinators, and I say that because I'm a procrastinator myself. Basically, this kind of says that this law kind of says that I would need my fellow procrastinators would need a little bit of stress in order to be motivated to get something done. If we don't have that little bit of stress, then we're not motivated. We don't actually want to get to it. And it's kind of the same way with if you think back to like the roller coaster and skydiving example, like that little bit of stress or excitement that's created by me riding a roller coaster, that motivates me to do that. But then once it gets past that, I'm too anxious, I'm too scared. When it gets to that point of like skydiving, that's too much for me. So I would no longer be motivated to get to that point. But the Yerkes-Dodson law goes hand in hand with arousal theory, but it also helps explain like how stress can help motivate as well. Okay, and the last thing we talk about in this PowerPoint is the hierarchy of needs with Maslow. If you remember Maslow from way back at the beginning of the semester, he's the guy I said it kind of looks like a Care Bear, but he he believed that we have this like pyramid, and I'll show you the pyramid image that he usually uses on the next slide. It's the same thing that's here on the right, but it's kind of easier to look at the pyramid way. And basically, what he says is that we have kind of 5 levels of needs, and that the only way we ever get to the highest one, or the only way we get to the next level or higher levels is if we fulfill the needs below it. Um, it's kind of vague, it's kind of subjective, it's kind of it's not really the best theory, I guess you could say, for motivation, but it's still um, it does a pretty good job of explaining our basic desires to be motivated. But then also, it's also used a lot in therapy methods of like, if you're having problems with relationships, then you're not satisfying like your personal needs first or whatever. So it's kind of it's used a lot in therapy as well. But if you look at this um, image here, so everything starts at the bottom. So what Maslow says is that all of these here at the bottom, breathing, food, water, sleep, sex, homeostasis, those kind of physiological needs that we all have as human beings, if those aren't met, those are our most basic needs. Okay. And once those are fulfilled and we feel comfortable with those things, we can move up into, safety. And safety is the security, resources, family, or the morality, health. And then, we eventually move up to love and belonging. This would be friendship, family, sexual intimacy as well. And then above that is self-esteem, achievement, confidence, respect by others, respect of self. And then this one up here at the very top, and I can't even draw a circle around what I'm trying to here, but this thing at the top is what he calls self-actualization. And this is the highest level, according to him, that we can get to for motivation. Like once we, like, this is what we all try to work towards, according to Maslow. This is our, when we get to, our, the high, the moral, creative, spontaneous things that motivate us. And again, the acceptance of ourselves, the acceptance of others. This is, again, very vague. And Maslow pointed out that not everybody gets to this level, but that is the highest level we can get to, according to this theory. Now, again, Maslow has been criticized by a lot of people, saying that the first four make perfect sense, but this fifth level, the self-actualization level, doesn't make a lot of sense to some people. So I can understand that, but it's been around for a while. It's a pretty well regarded theory overall, but again, I can understand the criticism as well. So anyway, so that's the theories of motivation. The next video will focus on some types of motivators. Again, just specific behaviors that we all tend to fall into when it comes to motivation. And yeah, we'll get into it then.